Good morning, YouTube. I hope everyone is doing well. And in today's video, I just want to talk about how we can live from our heart and soul in our ordinary lives. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I think with the rise of spiritual influencers, we tend to develop ideas of what it means to live a spiritual-based life. And I'm not saying that they necessarily promote a certain way, but we only see one aspect of their life. We only see the part that they show. We don't see them interact with strangers. We don't see them interact with their family and friends. And because we don't see that, we only see this one aspect, their business aspect of sharing their spiritual knowledge. We tend to think that in order for us to live a spiritual-based life, that we need to completely reorient our life, that we need to find high vibrational friends. We need to seek ways of employment that are more in alignment with our passions, and to an extent all of those things are true, are good advice. But I want to argue, or I would argue, that we can live a spiritual-based life now, and that our life doesn't need to completely reorient itself. And kind of the framework, or how I'm going to explain this, is influenced by Hinduism's idea of paths to God or living a spiritual-based life. Now, it's not exactly, I'm not talking about it in a religious sense, but I am talking about, or I'm using the ideas that they had and applying it to my life and then sharing it with you. So don't come to this video thinking you're going to learn about Hinduism, because that's not what it's about. But anyway, so in Hinduism, they believe that there are 4 different paths to God. In this video, I'm only going to talk about 3 because I've only applied 3 of them to my life. The 4th one is a little bit more difficult to, or for me anyway, to explain and to apply to ordinary life. But I would imagine that most of us are not ascetics or hermits, so we need to figure out how to balance our spirituality with living in society. And arguably that's a great thing to do, because that will naturally evolve how society works, how we interact with the world. But anyways, so on the spiritual path, or if you're a seeker, something that we tend to seek out is knowledge. We look for spiritual information, spiritual wisdom. But the tricky thing about seeking out knowledge is that it can inflate our ego, right? Because if we're only looking at one perspective, so like say for example you're a Buddhist, right, and you're only looking at Buddhist wisdoms or doctrines, not saying that's a bad thing, but you can start to think that that's the only truth, right? Like you believe that Buddhism is the ultimate truth and there's nothing, every other religion, every other school of thought, every other way of thinking is not right. And that's not true, and that kind of creates a dense ego. And this can be applied to anything, whether you're interested in psychology, looking at psychology just from one point of view, one psychological perspective, and you think that's like the truth of human nature, that it creates binders to how we see the world, and we only see the world through that filter. And I would argue that seeking to understand rather than seeking to know things is a better way to promote a more spiritual-based life, because it naturally dissolves our ego or makes it less dense, because we're seeking to understand other people's, other cultures' points of views, makes us more accepting of people, and also shows us that our perspective is limited and that there's more than one way to see the world. The second thing is, I would say, is through our relationships with people. And kind of like what I said earlier, is that we have these ideas that we need to have high vibrational people in our life. We need to only interact with people that are living more soul-based lives. And although those are nice things to have people that are less in their ego to interact with. It's not necessarily needed to live a spiritual based life. And that arguably interacting with people that are living more from an egoic space is good because it allows them to maybe see a different perspective, to see that not everyone maybe necessarily is out for self-interest, right? That there are people in the world that are interested in people for who they are and not what they can get from them. And that can also help to, for lack of a better word, awaken them, to maybe show them maybe the shortcomings or where they are falling short. Likewise, they can help to expand your awareness, you know? Just because someone is maybe living more out of the ego doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have something to teach you or something that you could benefit from. And not saying you're going into that relationship for that purpose, but just knowing that we're all human and we all have shortcomings, we all have blind spots. And that, I guess what I believe at our core is that we're all one. And even the people that are living from their ego, and to orient your life in a way that you don't interact with that is feeding your ego, because it's kind of implying that you are better than them. You are too good to interact with them, and that's not true. And a way that we can interact with people that are maybe more in their ego state is just accepting them for who they are. And this is across the board, whether they're living more out of the ego or they're spiritual or whatever it may be, just accepting people for who they are and where they're at on their journey. Because we're all at different places. We're all learning different things. And we need that contrast to understand the world. If we were all the same, if we were all on the same wavelength, same frequency, right, there would be nothing for us to understand because there's no contrast. And that learning to see people at their heart and soul at that level, I think helps promote or invokes people to live from that level, right, or live from that source. And I think maybe that's the main point for that one. And then the last one is through our work. And I think when it comes to our jobs, we tend to seek for security in our jobs. We want status, we want power, we want money, right? Things that help us live more comfortably. But what we kind of get confused about is that those things in themselves are not enough to sustain true happiness or enjoyment of life. And that our life is made up of a series of moments, right? How we spend our time is ultimately how we've spent our life. And on how society is structured right now, we spend, 40 plus hours of our day or of our week at work. And to spend 40 hours just to make money but doing something you don't like isn't conducive to living a spiritual based life, right? Because a part of awakening, a part of living a spiritual based life is honoring who we are authentically, honoring our interests, honoring our emotions, honoring everything about who we are, the human aspect and the divine aspect. There's no escaping either side. And when we work jobs for money or status but we don't like it, our life becomes miserable in that spot, and that radiates throughout other areas of our life. And that may be a better idea when it comes to our careers is not necessarily to pick based on our finances or status, but to pick on something that genuinely resonates with us. And this also does not necessarily mean that you need to pursue your passion, because that too can become problematic, right? Because when we pursue our passions as a career, it stops becoming an option. It stops becoming something we do for fun, and it becomes a business, something that becomes an obligation because it becomes our source of income, our source of survival. And, if you want to pursue passion, that is completely up to you. That is fine. I'm not judging you for that. And I'm not judging you for choosing a job for money or status. But what I am saying is honoring who you are and finding a job, finding something that you want to do regularly and letting the work be the reward. Because then it doesn't matter what you get out of it. It doesn't matter what people think, what people say, because the act of doing it fulfills you, right? And that you could kind of argue that's kind of like the basis for the knowledge aspect and for the relationship aspect. Just letting things be the way they are and accepting that gives rise to a spiritual based life. And it gives rise to a spiritual based life because you begin to understand that there's really nothing new. We're just kind of doing the same things we've been doing for years. They've just have advanced in some way, or they've been given different names, right? We're still trying to survive, we're still doing agriculture, we're still advancing our communication aspects, we're still the same as we were 100 years ago. It's just technology has advanced. There's still spiritual teachers, there's still evil, there's still darkness, there's still light. And that basically the point I'm trying to make, because you don't need to revamp your whole life to live a spiritual life, that you are already living it, right? It's just about awakening to the spiritual aspect, and that doesn't take revamping your whole life to awaken. Hopefully this made sense, and this is like the 7th time way more than that I've tried to film this video, but anyway, peace and love, YouTube. Until next time.